A former detective says Madeleine McCann was never abducted. Here's what he claims really happened.
Today, we're diving into a highly controversial alternative perspective on this tragic case. We're going to rely strictly on the public statements of veteran investigator Jon Wedger to unpack his unproven theory. Now remember, this is just his perspective, but it's one that really turns everything we thought we knew completely upside down.
Chapter 1. Red Flags, Early Warning Signs and Inconsistencies in the Official Story.
So, for years, the accepted narrative has been that Madeleine was taken by some unknown kidnapper, right? But Wedger's analysis questions the very foundation of that official story. Instead of looking at a stranger abduction, Wedger, who by the way handled a lot of complex child protection cases during his career, argues that investigators should have immediately focused on completely different things. He claims the focus should have been on child abandonment, the immediate behavior of the parents, and just basic crime scene logic.
According to Wedger, the whole thing starts unraveling when you look at the initial red flags. First off, he points to a glaring legal issue. He argues that leaving 3 children under the age of 4 completely alone is, literally, a criminal act under British law. And he alleges that authorities critically overlooked this massive legal breach right from the get-go. But beyond just the law, he also leans heavily into behavioral analysis. Drawing on his years of working with victims, Wedger claims that Kate McCann's appearance in her very first public appeal lacked the profound, all-consuming grief that he's personally witnessed in mothers who have just lost a child. For him, these elements absolutely demanded deeper scrutiny.
Chapter 2. The Timeline. What actually happened the night Madeleine disappeared?
Okay, so if Wedger alleges the official story has massive holes in it, what does he claim actually happened? Well, he constructs this step-by-step alternative timeline that fundamentally flips the narrative on its head. His unproven theory begins on day 1, with the suggestion that the children were actually sedated. From there, he theorizes that on day 2, a tragic accident, something like a fall or maybe an overdose, occurred days before anything was even reported to the police. This, he claims, led to day 3, a panic-driven cover-up where the apartment was forensically cleaned. And that ultimately leads to day 4, where he alleges the body was permanently removed and disposed of.
Chapter 3. The Forensic Evidence, Cadaver Dog Findings and What They Suggest.
Now, obviously, a theory of this magnitude requires some serious support, and Wedger points to a pattern of corroborating indicators to back up his claims. He places a really heavy emphasis on the use of specialized police dogs. These are dogs explicitly trained to detect microscopic traces of human decomposition. Wedger emphasizes that a cadaver dog alerted to the scent of death in 2 highly specific locations. First, the holiday apartment itself, and second, and this is crucial, in the trunk of a rental car that the family didn't even lease until 25 days after Madeleine was reported missing. According to Wedger, these dogs simply do not lie, and he claims their alerts strongly suggest that a death occurred.
But it's not just physical forensics. Wedger also relies on the analysis of words. He cites the work of the late Peter Hyatt, who is an American law enforcement statement analyst. Hyatt forensically examined the exact language used by the parents during their interviews, and based on his methodology, concluded that they were actually being deceptive.
Wedger argues that these oddities are plainly visible right there in the family's own words. For instance, he points to a very specific, kind of strange physical detail that was mentioned in Kate McCann's book. He describes this detail as a massive alarm bell for an investigator, arguing that phrasing like that is just completely incongruous with the normal expression of parental grief and trauma.
Chapter 4. The Cover-Up. Jon Wedger's allegations about suppressed evidence and institutional failure.
So this brings us to a huge question. If Wedger's theory is right, why wasn't it solved? Well, he alleges a massive, multi-level institutional failure that was designed to protect the parents. And he cites a staggering financial disparity as a primary piece of evidence for this. Operation Grange, which was the official UK police investigation that only pursued the abduction theory, used over £17 million of taxpayer money. Wedger contrasts that massive figure with the average missing child case in the UK, which he notes usually cost around £1,700. To put that into perspective, he asks an incredibly pointed question. Why on earth did this specific case receive 10,000 times the normal funding?
According to Wedger, that money was just part of a much larger pattern of outside interference. He lays out the claim that the original Portuguese police investigators were actually on the right track when they initially named the McCanns as suspects. But, he alleges, influential British authorities with absolutely no actual jurisdiction intervened. Wedger claims these authorities deliberately steered the investigation away from the parents, thwarted the local police, and eventually launched their own lavishly funded operation that focused solely on a stranger abduction.
Chapter 5. The Theory. what Wedger believes really happened and why.
So, how does a career detective finalize his perspective on such a tragic and complex case? For Wedger, it really just comes down to logical deduction. Step 1. He completely rejects the official narrative, describing a perfectly timed stranger abduction as highly improbable. Step 2. He falls back on a foundational policing principle. You know, the idea that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. And Step 3, by applying that principle to all the red flags, the cadaver dogs and the funding, he concludes that a tragic accident and a subsequent panic-driven cover-up just makes the most logical sense. Jon Wedger's theory has never been proven, but it has never been fully disproven either. Do you believe Madeleine McCann was abducted, or do you think the truth is still being hidden? Drop your theory below.